Today's project is a cool little airplane called the Mustang P51. First you have the wing, the fuselage, the rudder, the elevator, the slingshot, and a small ball bearing that we'll use to weigh our airplane properly. First thing you should do is put the ball bearing someplace where the children won't be able to get to it, because it does pose a choking hazard. I'll set it aside for now. The P51 Mustang is built in the course of 3 sessions, so let's start with session 1. First we'll take our fuselage, we'll take our wood block and our sandpaper. Best way for the children to sand this fuselage is to position themselves comfortably, have their workboard right up against the edge of the table, and very gently sand your fuselage along with the grain of the balsa wood. Not like that, but like that. If you find that the students are having trouble sanding, or if there's just too much excess balsa wood to get through, you can always help them by taking your box cutter, clicking it open a couple of blades, and trimming off some of the excess wood, giving them a little bit more time to sand. Once it's done, it'll look something like this. The next step is to sand the elevator. We don't want to sand the center line off because we're going to use it as a guide later, but we do want to sand down to the marked blue lines. Now, as you can see, this balsa wood is very delicate, so when they place the elevator onto their board, they want to make sure that they're going with the grain and sanding very gently, not up and down like that, otherwise the balsa wood will snap. And again, if you find that there's too much excess balsa wood for them to get to and it's slowing them down, you can always go around and help them out by trimming it with your box cutter. We'll do the same thing for the rudder. When that's done, it'll look something like this. Now that we've got our main pieces sanded, what we're going to do is attach the rudder to the fuselage. First we'll dry fit it to make sure that the slot is wide enough to accept the rudder. You need to ask the children to resist the urge to just jam the rudder into the fuselage, because it'll break the rudder. What you should do is have them gently slide the rudder from the rear forward into the slot, applying as little pressure as possible. Now we know that our rudder fits. What we'll do next is we'll take it out, we'll find some old sandpaper and put a little bit of white glue on the back of it, like that. What the children can then do is take the rudder with their finger, apply a very thin film along the bottom of the rudder where it's going to attach to the fuselage, just like that. Once the students have white glue along the bottom of the rudder, they can again very gently slide it into the slot using only the amount of force needed to hold it in place, like that. Once that's done, the instructor can go around and reinforce the bond by applying 3 small dots of the cyanoacrylic glue on one side and giving it a little bit of spray fixer. That'll hold it in place. Some students may finish before the others. If that's the case, you can take out the markers from your toolbox and allow them to color the fuselage with the magic markers. That's the end of session 1. Now let's begin session 2. For session 2, we're going to start with the wing. We'll need some sandpaper and our sanding block. As we did with the fuselage, make sure that the student gets in a position that's comfortable. We'll put our board up against the table's edge, lay one panel of the wing flat against the board, and again, gently sand with the grain of the wood, not up and down, with the grain of the wood, until we reach the pre-marked blue lines. When we've done that, you should have something that looks like that. The next step in session 2, which is attaching the elevator to the fuselage. Now we've already sanded the elevator in session 1, so we should be ready to dry fit it to make sure that everything fits properly. The leading edge of the elevator is where it's more pointed, and that'll face towards the front of the fuselage. When inserting the elevator, you don't want to hold the balsa wood from the far end and try to force it in like that. Otherwise, it'll break. What you want to do is hold it as close to the edge that's going into the fuselage as possible, just like this. And just very, very gently wiggle it until the dotted center line is obscured by the fuselage, and it'll look like that. The next step is you'll want to hold your kit up about arm's length to make sure that the rudder and the elevator are perpendicular and straight. Once you're satisfied that that's the case, you can again take an old piece of sandpaper, apply some white glue to the back of it, as we did with the rudder, and have the students carefully glue the elevator in place by spreading a thin film along the seam, just like that. The instructor can then come around and reinforce the bond by applying 3 small dots of the cyanoacrylic glue, as you see there, and then spraying it with the accelerator. You'll end up with something that looks like this. Now that our tail assembly is complete, we're going to insert the wing. If you take a look at the wing, you'll find that it's an elliptical shape. But if you look a little bit more closely, you'll see that one side of the wing forms a little bit more of an angle than the other side. This part where the angle occurs is going to be our leading edge. When we insert our wing, the top of the wing is going to be the side that has the dotted lines like that. Once we've established where the leading edge is, we'll insert our wing into the slot much the same way we did with the elevator till the center line lines up with the fuselage. Before we glue it, we want to make sure that the wings are symmetrical, that it's not askew like that, and that when you hold it at arm's distance, the wings and the elevator all line up properly. Okay? When we test fly our gliders indoors, we may find that they tend to either go up and stall or dive. We can correct those flight characteristics by gradually moving the wing forward or backward. If you find that your aircraft is tail heavy, it'll go up and stall. What we need to do is add a little bit of weight to the front of the plane. We accomplish this by incrementally moving the wing forward and testing it again until we have it where it will fly straight and level. If you find that your airplane is diving, that means it's nose heavy, and we need to put some of the weight of the plane towards the rear of the fuselage. We can do that by, again, incrementally moving the wing towards the rear of the fuselage and test flying it indoors. Another tool that we have is this small circle that you see printed underneath the wing. That's an indication of where the center of gravity may be on your airplane, and it's a good guide to use to see just how far off you are before you start flying. The way to test this is to take your fingers and see where your airplane balances in relation to that small circle. If your fingers are right aligned with the circle, then you know that your airplane is balanced. Once you're satisfied that the wings are level with the elevator and that they're symmetrical, you can go ahead and begin the gluing process. Welcome back. This is session 3 of building the Mustang P51 model. Open up the small plastic bag that came in the kit, and you'll find that you have a dowel, a rubber band, and 2 rubber caps. Put the rubber caps at each end of the dowel, like that. Then take your rubber band and drape it over one end of the dowel. Some students will be inclined to put the rubber band like that. That's incorrect. You want them to drape the rubber band over just like that. Once you've got that, reach through one loop and pull the other through just like that. Pull the rubber band and twist the dowel at the same time, and that'll give you a nice tight knot like that. First we'll take our catapult and we'll loop the rubber band and hook it on the bottom of our Mustang like that. Keep a little tension on it so it doesn't slide off. We'll hold our Mustang at the rear of the fuselage behind the tail section with 2 fingers. Pull back on the Mustang, and you'll find that a lot of aircraft have a tendency to either bank to the left or bank to the right. You can start off shooting at level, but I would suggest that you try both ways to see which way your particular model flies best. The P-51 Mustang is a very historically significant airplane. In fact, they're so popular with restorers today that you can usually find many of them at air shows all across the country. It was originally built for the Royal Air Force by the United States, incorporating Rolls-Royce engines. But once the United States saw what a wonderful design it had on its hands, it wasn't long before the aircraft was assigned to most squadrons in the United States Army Air Corps in both Europe and the Pacific theaters during World War II. The design was so advanced, in fact, that many air forces around the world continued to use them up until the 1960s, where they would fly alongside many much more advanced jet planes. Enjoy flying yours.